back okay? The application's picking me up okay? This is, look, I happen to be here anyway, and wanted to come by and talk, and let me get this off the screen. My talks are super not formal. In fact, I'm going to spend time drawing pictures, and I will show a couple slides, things like that. How many, look, this is an open charity event, and that means membership are supposed to be people working with nonprofit organizations mostly, but some people may have just snuck in. How many people here work with nonprofit organizations? No, I see hands up high. Okay. How many people snuck in and don't? Okay. Good. All right. Let me see if I can contextualize a little bit. I didn't know who the audience would be. I grabbed something I've already talked about, but I want to make this relevant to nonprofits. Because if you're a nonprofit, I don't know if you consider, I don't know if you think of what you have as a product. All right. For people that don't know me, I've been around a long time. I've been in software development for 25 years. I started a very small product company. In 2000, I started working with Agile development. Actually, I didn't start working with Agile development because the term was not even coined until 2001. I started with a process called extreme programming. And in 2001, the term Agile was coined, and suddenly I found I was doing an Agile process. And extreme programming, where things like concepts like stories and terms like velocity come from, Scrum, where terms like product owner and sprints come from. And these days, when we say, Scrum has won the Agile brand war. So now people, when we talk about Scrum or Agile, when we talk about Agile, we often mean Scrum. And we're starting to see a common Agile practice there. Now, I warn people that I started early with this Agile stuff, and I usually warn people that I have hated it since I started with it, that it is screwed up. Now, but that's hyperbole. I don't hate it. I wouldn't still be doing it if I hated it. There is a lot of super valuable, useful stuff, but I started in Agile development. I started learning the process, but my job title on my first Agile process was product manager. And I had come from a product background, and I've spent the last, honestly, 17, 18 years of my career trying to fix this stuff. First as a product manager in my own company, and then as a consultant, and now I get to talk to other people about it, and I don't know why people listen, because all I do is complain. Look, Agile development has fixed a lot of problems in software development, but things are better than they used to be. We can deliver more software more predictably than we ever have before. We now focus a lot more on collaboration, but the state of Scrum, the state of Agile has gotten a little nutty and scary lately, such that if you follow common Agile practice or Scrum by the book, look, it used to be bad, but now it's actually even worse. I think if you're doing Scrum or Agile by the book, you end up with something worse than if you weren't. Look, if you're a product owner, how many people have had to have the job of product owner sometime in their life? Okay, that's enough. Look, you know that if you're a product owner, this job absolutely sucks. Yeah, it's terrible. We used to use terms for product owner like the single wringable neck or one throat to choke. Has anybody ever heard those terms before? We built a process where it's not our fault as the team, it's that guy's fault if something goes wrong, and that's bad. Now, we talk about needing a really good product owner, and that's absolutely true, but Agile development has set up this almost antagonistic perspective of the product owner. Now, I think we've got to do some work to fix how Agile talks about product ownership and products in general, and I think it's sort of important that we do. I took this picture a little over a year ago, actually, figure out when I took it exactly. I took it at the Barbican Center, not too far from here. This was at a conference called Mind the Product. Anybody heard of a conference called Mind the Product? Anybody been to Mind the Product? Okay, great, you might have been there. Look, at this conference, this is a conference for people who are product managers, and mostly at product companies, product managers, some UX people, and some engineers, things like that, but these are product leaders. And the conference is usually around 1,500 people. They fill up the Barbican Center, big talks, and there was one spontaneous, the year I took this picture, there was one spontaneous applause line in the middle of a talk. And it's when the speaker said, look, I hate Agile. It's all points and velocity, and no one ever talks about the customer. Now, and then a room full of product people applaud. Agile development has a real problem in the product world, and I've spent a lot of my life trying to fix that. Now, what I want to talk about are 5 specific things you need to start doing to fix this. We've got people who are here in the nonprofit world. Let me see how much I can contextualize this a little bit. Let's talk about the first one. First, stop treating product owners like a customer. You see if I can explain what I mean by that. I have to shift back to my preferred presentation mode, and that's Sharpie marker. There is a common way that we work with people when we are buying a service. I'm going to call this a client-vendor pattern. Now, when we work this way, someone takes on the role of a client, and someone takes on the role of a vendor. We do this all the time. I'll tell the story that's recent in my mind, because it is. Our car got hit by somebody, and we needed to get our car repaired. The person who hit us agreed to pay for it, and then my wife took it to a body shop to get an estimate on how long it would take. And so, look, my wife is the client in this model, and when you're the client in this model, it is your job to know what you want. And you find somebody who acts as a vendor in this model. Look, it's your job to know what you want to explain it. And it's the vendor's job. Well, they have to listen and they have to understand and ask questions. And especially when we're performing a service, it's their job. They've got to have to understand it well enough that they can figure out how they're going to do it, so that they can figure out how long it's going to take. Because they're responsible for that time thing. We need to understand well enough that we can agree on what the scope is, and we can figure out how long and how we can figure out the cost. And, well, when this person describes what they want, if we're getting formal about it, we call it their requirements. My wife didn't call it that, and she would say, here are my requirements. But these guys did give back an estimate for time. Now, my wife didn't like the estimate she was getting. It was super expensive. She asked why, asked them to explain it, and then she decided she didn't like this vendor so much. She could have haggled or pushed back on the price, but she actually went to some other place and got a better price and talked with them. She ended up taking the car to a different place. Now, in the real world, we might push back against this estimate. We might negotiate and try and agree on a price. Because if we can do that, I will get a better price. And if I can pay less for what I want, then I get more value. That's the way it works. I pay less, I get more. That's awesome. If I'm on this side of the model, I need to protect my interest. I need to make sure that I'm getting paid enough to do my service, and that's what I need to do. So we negotiate back and forth, but look, once we agree, we give back an order, and that's when things get tricky for the vendor. That's when they learn, if they really did understand, if they really did estimate how long, if they really did work hard, or they really did work out how to do this thing, they need to do the work. They need to focus on being on time. They need to focus on the quality. They need to protect their costs. And they eventually well, they deliver. They give back the work. Make sense? Now, this pattern makes sense. It works well if you're a client, it works well if you're a vendor, but it gets really stupid if you both work for the same company. Because if I start haggling, look, let's say for a minute we call these people the business, and we call these people IT. Now, if the business says, I don't like that estimate and do it for cheaper, we may try and haggle and agree, and we eventually agree, and I have this false sense of, hey, I won this negotiation, I'm going to do better. But because we both work for the same company, just because you got a better price doesn't mean you got better value. It still costs the same amount to do it. It still comes out of the same pocket. We all work for the same company, and nobody got a deal here at all. It does not matter. Now, if you really push on the time estimate, and these people have to work overtime and things like that to get it, one of the things that happens is the quality leaks out, and in the client-vendor anti-pattern, if you finish it on time but you reduce the quality, then the client loses. But when we both work for the same company, we all lose. It's just dumb. And what's annoying is this pattern is preserved, hardened inside of Scrum. In Scrum, we call this person the product owner, and we call this group the team. And the product owner is responsible for knowing what they want and building a backlog and explaining it and giving acceptance criteria. The team is responsible for cost and time. In fact, this time, cost, and scope contract is perfectly hardened into Scrum. Every 2 weeks, we fix the time, 2 weeks. We fix the costs in the form of the team size, and then we have a planning meeting to agree on the scope. And at the end of that 2 weeks, we see if you met your time scope cost contract. That's kind of nice to shorten it to 2 weeks because we start to really get some information on how good we are at that. And it's better than having a long one, but that's the way that this works. Is anybody familiar with extreme programming as a process? Does anybody ever do extreme programming as a process? Does anybody remember what the extreme program didn't call this person a product owner? Do you remember what they called this person? The customer. Now, usually a customer means somebody who buys something, but again, when they work for the same company, weird. It doesn't make sense. In my first job in Agile development, in XP, I was called the customer. My business card said product manager. And I actually sat in a different room than the team, and it was not the way it worked. Now, I had been building software for 10 years prior to that, and this is not the way that I work. I built software in a product organization, and my organization sold this product to other people. And we used a pattern I describe a lot that I'm going to use some language from a guy named Marty Kagan. Kagan has written a book on product management called Inspired, and he's famous for lots of things, but basically he used to run product at eBay. He started eBay when eBay was less than 100 people, helped eBay grow to the size that it was. He left eBay in 2008, and he was responsible for all product management and all user experience at eBay. Now, he describes the job of a product manager. And as a product manager, it is your job. To build a successful product. And a successful product is a combination. There's three things we worry about. We worry about whether this product is valuable. Valuable means, I'm just going to rattle off things. It's valuable to your organization. To understand what's valuable to your organization, you need to understand how your organization's business model works, how it makes money, for a nonprofit, what its mission is and how it achieves its mission. You need to understand its vision, you need to understand its strategy because you're going to need to carry it into your organization. You also need to understand your customers and users. It's called a market in product terms. Customers you also need to not confuse customers and users. Users use software, customers buy software. Sometimes users and choosers is a better way to think of it. especially for bigger or enterprise class products, the person who decides to buy the software is not the same one who uses it. I just came from SAP in Waldorf, and I'm working with them, but look, if you use SAP in your business, I'm pretty sure you weren't the one that decided to adopt SAP in your business. The one who decided to adopt SAP is usually on a golf course somewhere else, or long gone. So valuable means you need to understand those people, because it needs to be, if you're investing in it, it's valuable to your organization, and it has a value proposition for your customers. It also needs to be usable, because look, it may have a value proposition and people buy it, but those users actually have to use this stuff. So you need to do usable, you need to understand how users work, where the problems are and how they work. You need to figure out where the solutions are. How do we change the way they work and build software that supports the way they work? If we can figure out solutions, it's not enough just to name what they are. You have to design what they look like, and it's not enough just to design or draw pretty pictures of what they look like. You usually need to prototype it and kind of prove that people can actually use it. So to be usable, you got to do that. And then finally, because any idiot can come up with super cool ideas we can't afford to build, it has to be feasible to build given the time and tools that I've got. So to do feasible right, you have to know how to code. You have to, because everybody's sitting on a pile of crap legacy code, you have to understand your code and how much it's going to cost to change your code. You have to understand things that are less tangible in code that isn't always understood by business concerns or users concerns, things like scale and security and performance, things like that. And then finally, because if you're talking about a technology product or code ages in dog years. So look, 5-year-old code is old. If you want to build something that actually lasts 5 or 10 years, you've got to be mindful of technology trends or where things are going. If you're just now thinking about adopting cloud-based architecture, you're sort of behind. Look, 5-10 years ago, everybody said mobile first, and if you're just now saying, gosh, I wonder if we should do a mobile app, you're behind. If you haven't even heard about implications of AI or Internet of Things, you're behind. If you're building technology, you've got to be mindful of what's coming. So I didn't write down all this stuff as I was talking about. I almost regret it because it's a lot of words I just said. So what Kagan is saying is that you have to understand all that about your business, all that about users, and be able to do that, and all that about technology, and that's what it takes to build a successful product. And when I say all that stuff, you're supposed to say, that is freaking impossible for any one person to do, and it is. So Kagan's approach is to say, look, you can't, you're accountable for a successful product, so you better be a strong collaborator. You better surround yourself with a product team that does, and that means you need people that understand users and the way they work. It's usually a UX person these days or a product designer, and you better understand yourself with somebody who is a lead or a senior engineer that understands those things. A product team is composed of these people. And in fact, what we look for is not a product owner making the decisions. When we talk about the decision-making body, we look for what Kagan would call a core product team. Now, if I talk about that concept, actually, let me show this guy's name is Sharif. Sharif works at this company called Atlassian. Does anybody use Atlassian software like Jira or Confluence? So first time I walked into Atlassian, now years ago, he was showing me around, showing me where product teams sit. And a product team means I've got some developers, I've got a UX person, I've got a product manager, and they all sit together in the same place. He was showing me this product team sits here, this product team sits here. And he pointed to a group of desks that were together, and he said, this is where the triad sits. Tryout is Atlassian's jargon for core product team. And I can ask who's the tryout on any team, and they'll tell me who the lead engineer is, who the UX person is, and they are the decision-making body. They're the ones that do this. Because look, I don't want somebody who doesn't understand technology making technology decisions. I don't want somebody who doesn't understand user experience making decisions on what the UI should look like or what it should do. We do want somebody ultimately accountable, but they better be leaning heavily on these other people to help them make good decisions. I asked Sharif to send me a picture of his core product team, and he sent me this picture of them working together on stuff, a dev lead, and actually an architect and a designer. And I said, well, where are you in the picture? He says, well, you asked me to send you a picture. I took the picture. I said, okay. But these are the people he works closest with, but that's not everybody on his team. That's the core. Now, I talk about this core team concept because these people work closely together, and we talk about who builds the backlog and who decides. They decide together, and we look for that product of manager to be a strong leader. Now, I started with this idea of this mind the product company, and look, I just drew this picture for you, and it should look familiar because it's the freaking logo for mind the product. This concept of what's important from a business perspective and a user's perspective, and what they're advocating is a strong approach to collaborative product ownership. And what feels really at odds to these people that mind the product is this notion that there's a product owner that makes a decision and a team that does what they're told. That's not the way I worked, and it's not the way they like to work. The other weird thing is this whole definition of product owner. Look, product managers lead product teams own products. That's a big difference. There's the punchline. Look, I just said that, more or less. So again, that's where some dissonance comes from, and that's what bothers us and me. First thing is you build product teams, you don't separate them, don't apply the client-vendor anti-pattern to this. Now, let me add one more thing. These are the big things up front, and I'm going to have to, they'll get shorter, lay some foundation. Now, maybe that's that obvious. Look, it's not about how fast you deliver, about how much you deliver. Look, in the client-vendor anti-pattern, it is about how fast and how much you deliver. In fact, when you apply this model, this person wants stuff, and their goal is to get as much stuff as they can for as cheap as they can. It's not the way it actually works in a product company. Now let me draw this model. If anybody's ever seen me give a talk before, I apologize because I draw this model every single time, and I will keep drawing it until I don't have to anymore. Most product design processes start at the beginning with ideas. Those ideas can be for whole new products. They can be for features or capabilities. They might describe how we go about doing design work to figure out exactly what it is. We might decide how we specify those things, and they might describe things like use cases or tools for specifying stuff. But these are the things that most processes refer to as requirements. Then we're going to turn those ideas into actual stuff that we can ship. And since we're spending money to do this, we worry about the cost. And cost in software is usually a function of that team, the people that are working to build those things. We also worry about the time because those things are sort of connected that it's going to take. And we call all this stuff the scope, and we worry about agreeing on that. And everybody's heard of this time, cost, scope dependency. They call this an iron triangle or a triple constraint. And the idea is that if we fix time and cost, then the scope is going to have to flex. If we fix time and scope, well, then we may have to add more people, and that's how that goes. And if we fix all of them, then the quality is going to leak out. So there's a fourth thing in there, but you can't call it a triple constraint if there's four. In Agile development, we don't say scope, we say the backlog. And in Agile development, like I was joking about before, we do fix time, cost, and scope, but only in short cycles. We take this long cycle it takes to actually get something we want and break it into small time periods, and we fix time, cost, and scope in the small. And we measure how much scope we delivered in that time period. We call that measurement velocity. this is not a product development process. This is a project process. It's a way to get more stuff faster, or to have some predictability of the stuff you're going to get. And that's cool to have predictability and to focus on some quality here. But a product development process starts way upstream. A product development process starts by paying attention to the product you have today and paying attention to the people who are using it. When you pay attention to the people who are using it, that's when you figure out these people are ticked off and unhappy, and sometimes angry, or sometimes just frustrated and struggling. And it's the paying attention to them, that's where those ideas come from. Now in the client-vendor anti-pattern, the ideas come from the client. But look, if you develop a product that has a lot of customers, you pay attention to a lot of people, and you make tough decisions on which people to focus on. And when we have to do that now, or before we start, and when we ship this stuff later, what we hope is that those people are happy. And unfortunately, there's a lot of times, especially for commercial product, there's a lot of people, and some people are less happy, and some people just aren't. You can't please everybody. Now, the terms I want to point out here is it's everything between there and there, that is output. That's what we make. That is not what matters. It's not why we did it. It's not where the value comes from. The value comes from what happens when things come out. We measure, what we want is what happened after. We call that outcome because of that. And if we measure output in terms of time, cost, and scope, or velocity, and story points, or however we do that here, we measure outcome completely different. We measure outcome and how these people change their behavior. These people need to see what we built, they need to try what we built, they need to use what we built, and they need to keep using what we built, and ideally they tell others, they say good things about it. Because if we deliver something they didn't do any of that, that's a fail. So you can probably already detect if you're using something like Scrum and you show your product in a sprint review and you try and determine how much value there is there. The value only comes out after this. That's the annoying thing about value, or annoying thing about outcomes, is they only happen when things come out, not at sprint review. Now, let's backtrack. This looks like a nifty process for making people happy. But companies aren't in the business of making people happy. The problem really starts upstream, back here in your organization. And your organization has a completely different responsibility. It has a responsibility to sustain itself. Now, I realize I've got a lot of nonprofit organizations here. Truth is, nonprofit organizations, I wish they did run a little bit more like businesses, because a nonprofit organization has to sustain itself also. Now, it might sustain itself by working with donors, but the way it effectively works with donors isn't by showing how much crap it delivered, but by showing the outcomes that it got from what it did. You cannot get more donors by showing how much software you shipped. I think that restating myself. Look, so sustaining yourself for the organization is actually a lot about proving outcomes. Your organization should have some vision for where it wants to go. It should have some strategy for how it's going to get here, and it should have some metrics. And those metrics are a lot about how well the organization is sustaining itself. If those metrics are flat, people inside the building are unhappy. They're not unhappy because using the software sucks. They're unhappy because the org can't sustain itself. Now, if you're a consumer commercial organization, the flat numbers are revenue, or maybe costs are high. If you're a nonprofit, it's donor contributions, things like that. And if we don't have good donor contributions, that's bad. And hopefully we get some guidance on where we need to focus. If we move forward here, if we deliver something, few people use it, that's awesome. But if hundreds do, if thousands do, if this stuff happens, we start to see good things or things change in the organization. Those metrics start to go up. People inside the organization are happy. And again, they're not happy because this software is awesome. They're happy because the organization can sustain itself. I'm going to give a different term for this longer term behavior, and that's impact. And we measure impact in things like return, for commercial organization, things like return on investment, or brand awareness, or market share. look, if you talk to customers about what's bugging them, they're not laying awake at night worrying about your market share, your brand awareness. Their problems are not your problems. And your organizations, I spend most time with people understanding that if you're talking to the business and they're concerned about these things, they need to realize, look, business, you don't get what you want unless these people get what they want. There's a nasty dependency here. If you thought your triple constraint was time, cost, and scope, it's not exactly the same kind of triple constraint. You've got to worry about these things. Has anybody heard of this language system of outcome, output, outcome, and impact before me talking about it? Anybody heard of it from elsewhere? This was stolen from the nonprofit world. Has anybody heard this from the social change or nonprofit world? I stole it because business people suck so much because they use words like goal and objective. And it can be a goal to get this delivered on time. It can be a goal to increase customer satisfaction. It can be a goal to get return on investment. And the precision that I heard from someone out of the nonprofit world using this language was super useful. So I started pushing it into business context. And we're using it a lot more now today in commercial software development. All right, here's the problem is, so if you're following this model, in the client vendor model, look, these people are responsible for output. They're responsible for scope and time and cost and managing scope so that they can do the time and cost, but these people are responsible for outcome and impact. And the tragedy here is the people responsible for outcome and impact often don't have the skills it takes to understand what is usable or what is valuable or feasible. They may understand what's valuable, but they aren't operating with a full, with the people they need to make decisions. And that's why we don't use this pattern in a product company. That's why if we want to focus on outcome and impact, we pull these people together on a single product team. Look, let's all leave this. When you ship something, you need to know if you've got value. And you do that, teach people to be good at measuring things. Now most organizations are pretty, if you're a nonprofit, you're probably good at measuring how much donor contributions you have and how much money's in the bank. But we build software all the time without being able to measure if anyone actually used it or not. And if you ship a piece of software and you cannot tell me if somebody used it, that means, well, do you really care? I wonder. If people here familiar with Agile development and this concept of user stories? Just curious, does anybody have to write acceptance criteria for stories? Let me give you the quick 3 questions to ask to get acceptance criteria right. First thing to ask is, if we build this, how will we confirm it's really done? That's good. One thing that I like adding to that is, how will we demonstrate this functionality when we review it? Because that drives just to think a little bit deeper about how we will show it and how people will use it. And the last question is, how will we measure outcomes after this thing is in use? That drives us to say, how will I actually measure if someone used it? It drives us to put analytics in our product so that we can actually check if someone used it. Look, plan to measure outcomes. And look, if you said this, if you ship a feature and you can't measure it, that's not so good. Don't mistake velocity for value. Well, that value comes from that other stuff. Now, your job, if I hit this hard, the most annoying problem about this whole stupid model is this idea thing. The problem with ideas, first, is that everybody has them. That's annoying thing number 1. And because everybody has them, there is always too many. This causes a lot of back pressure on this system. It causes us to feel like we need to serve or satisfy all these people by building everything. Now, here's the other rub, is that most of these ideas suck. Look, if I told you I had a great idea for a new tech product, a new tech startup, hey, what's the failure rate of tech startups? 90%, things like that. Looks like most tech startups fail. Now, the weird thing that happens is once you get a successful product out there and you're starting to add features or capabilities, suddenly everybody believes all of our ideas are awesome from now on. How many of you have ever bought a product that you don't actually use? Curious? It should have been everybody. Look, people like, if I use Atlassian and things like Jira and Confluence, for example, they suffer from a problem that a lot of product companies do, where lots of customers ask for things that they thought they wanted, they actually put it in there, and people saw it, they tried it, they maybe used it, but they just didn't keep using it. And their product is filled with a lot of things their customers thought they wanted, but then did not use. And that's why that product, that's why Microsoft Word, that's why Microsoft Excel, and a lot of products are so polluted with features we don't use. There are studies that show that 60 to 70% of features in products fit into the rarely or never used category. The companies that are super good at this are eBays and Netflixes and Amazons, because they constantly measure whether people used, and they constantly pull things out that don't get used. That's super valuable. Look, most of our ideas suck. Now, let me give you the last and third problem here. Has anybody ever visited a startup accelerator or incubator before? There's co-working spaces, lots of startups working in the same place. They usually get a little bit of training and help and some financial support to do this. If you walk into one of these places, they've got to be super depressing, right? Are they?
Yeah.
Yes? Are people dragging around, moping, feeling bad? Working late, complaining about it, saying this sucks, I hate this place? Is that true? Yeah. Well, you're saying you're nodding no. No, usually they're pretty upbeat places. People are pretty fired up. Look, if I told you 80% or 90% of the people in your company were going to be laid off within the next year, I promise you they would not be pretty fired up. And it's not because the founders of startups are stupid. It's not because they think the failure rate of startups is 10% and the success rate is 90%. If you ask any one of these startups, they will say, yes, most startups fail, and they can look around at all the other startups in the room and say, most of these companies fail, most of these ideas suck, but not ours. Every idea we have, we come in with a huge amount of bias. We have future perfect imagination for outcome and impact. We have a hard time imagining that something will suck. This makes the job of product manager super critical. Your job is not to build more of the crap that people ask you for. Your job is to build less. Because you know that most of these things suck and we don't know which. You have to build a process to help you figure that out. Your job isn't to build more, your job is to build less. It's to minimize that output at the same time that you maximize that outcome and impact. Now, I started this by saying, stop focusing on how much you're building and start focusing on that. Look, you've got to minimize output, maximize and measure outcome and impact. Now, let's get to, I've got 3, 4, and 5. Let's see if we can go pretty quick on those. Look, you need to assume you're not building something worthwhile. I sort of just explained why most things aren't going to be worthwhile. Now, has anybody ever written a user story before? And they've used this format, the as a user, I want, so that I can get some sort of benefit. That's cool. The cool thing about that is it forces us to not just talk about the software, forces us to actually start talking about these people, the who, and the what they want, and, well, the why. And the why actually has two sides. The problem that sucks, and why means how we'll use it. The annoying thing about that user story format is it never talks about your business and why it wants what it wants, and it needs what it needs, and things like that. And the other thing is there's almost no humility in that. There's no, look, I want this and here's why. Now you just effing go build it. That's the way it works. But that's not, the way product companies actually work. And now, I'm showing this picture, and some people have seen me give a talk before, and I'm not gonna explain why these people have such, I can say why they have such sour expressions on their face, but the thing I wanna point out, these people work for a US company called CarMax. For the Americans in the room, you might know who they are, depending on how long ago you lived in America. They are officially the world's largest used car dealership. They're a Fortune 100 company. When I put 14 billion in revenue in that slide, that was the number from a couple years ago. They will cross 16 billion this year. They had 170 locations. I think they're up to 190 locations, something like that. They're pretty big. They are, again, Earth's biggest used car dealership. These people work there at CarMax. This is a conversation, and there's a product manager there, there's a UX person, I'm standing next to the development team, and the people in this picture are the CIO, a director of product, a director of operations, and what they're talking about is this thing on the wall. And some of you may have seen these before. If you've looked at lean user experience or lean startup, you might have seen something called a hypothesis statement. And it does not explain what people want, it explains, well, our hypothesis. Now, look, I'm going to use this word hypothesis, but hypothesis is a sexy word for our beliefs or our bets. And it says, this one says, we believe that by providing Maureen. Now, Maureen is a name of a persona. Maureen is somebody, this is the finance group of CarMax, and they believe that providing somebody who needs financing on a car, look, she needs to know not how much the car costs, but what her payment is to make a buying decision. The problem today with car buying is you learn what the payment is after you decide this is the car I want and then do the financing paperwork, then you finally get that number. And it's a function of your credit, it's a function of the price of the car, the rate, especially for used cars, a function of the age of the car, the mileage on the car. And Maureen gets this rate and then she says, oh, that payment is more than I can afford, I need to go back and look at a different car. And then they have to do this whole thing again. It takes her a lot of time. So they believe that if they provide her decisions, and these are really lender-approved loans, exactly what your payment will be on all cars, she's going to be able to really choose, make a better buying decision and buy faster. Now this is not a trivial thing. What it means is they have to change the way lenders work. Lenders have to give them algorithms or give them approvals and give them the ability to calculate a car payment on every single car on their lot. That's what they mean by decisions. It means if she fills out a quick application, then if she starts looking online or looking on the lot or browsing, she doesn't just see the price of the car, she sees her exact payment. And she can more or less click buy it now and bypass all the paperwork has already been done. All the financing has been done. And CarMax sells enough cars, you know, for the same reason that Apple could change the way voicemail worked in 2007, they can change the way lenders work in 2017. Was filmed. That's cool. So look, I like replacing this with a we bet. This is what they bet. They bet that if they provide Maureen decisions on all vehicles, that she's going to feel more empowered to buy her car. It's just going to save her time, and that results is going to result in a higher. It's going to in a higher rate of conversion. Maureen does not care about CarMax's conversion rate. They do. In fact, if they increase the conversion rate by a single-digit percentage, it's going to make tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars a year in benefit. This is a bet, and when we start to ask people what they would bet, things start to change. Now, look, I've got two pictures I can draw here. Actually, let's do this. I am going to draw this picture. Look, we ask people, actually, what would you bet? If I've got a hypothesis here, and let's say I have a top-to-bottom axis that is my confidence, and if my confidence is high, it would be close to the top of the axis. Also, it means my risk is low. Now, if you were to phrase it as we bet that this is the benefit we're going to get, you ask people, how confident are you? Now, because people are biased, they believe their suggestions are good, we ask kind of in a tricky way. We say, okay, great, you buy that. Let's say we've written it down, we know it's going to do this, you believe it's going to do this, what would you bet me? Would you bet me lunch that you're right? Well, would you bet me your next vacation that you're right? Would you bet me your car that you're right? Would you bet me your house that you're right? Would you bet me your retirement savings that you're right? Our company's about to spend the equivalent of your retirement savings or more to build this thing. So you better be willing to bet more than lunch on this. And in organizations where there's not any accountability, where no one, if things fail, no one's to blame, asking this question sort of helps, at least making somebody a friendly bet. That's lunch for me for the next year is a useful sort of discussion. Now, once you get the hang that, okay, this is a bet, and we are going to start to build some software, we start to think about what do we do to test our bet. Now, there's an axis here at the bottom that ranges from ways to test our bet or to increase our confidence or reduce risk, a range of things that range from cheap and fast to expensive and time-consuming. Now, if we bet that if we're going to build some software that it's we're going to get this benefit, I will submit to you that the most expensive way to test your bet is to build scalable, shippable software. The stuff that is potentially shippable, the stuff you want every single sprint. Look, that's the most expensive way to prove you're right. Now, if we're not so sure if we're right, if we start by understanding that we have a hypothesis, we say, okay, I'm not so sure I'm right. One of the things we do is build this other weird backlog. I'm going to call this a learning backlog. And this learning backlog isn't built out of stuff to build. It's built out of assumptions that scare us, or risks, or just flat out holes in what we know, questions that we need to learn. And we prioritize this backlog by what scares us the most. What's the thing keeping me from saying, yes, I would bet my house that this is right? If we could, what information could we learn that would do this? And we put that at the top. And then we say, okay, great. If this is the big thing, the question, the big thing I've got to learn, what's the least I could possibly do in order to learn that? And then we call this thing a test plan. And then we create a test. Look, if we're not sure if people want the software, we might create a prototype or something to show them. We might do something to test value. But ultimately, a lot of times, the biggest worry isn't can we build this on time. The biggest worry is will people try this and use it and keep using it? Will enough of them do that we could get return on investment? And we come up with ways to test that, and oftentimes it means getting out and putting something in front of people and watching how they use it or looking at analytics, and what we get back from that isn't software, it's data. And that changes our hypothesis, and we go around this again. How many people have heard of things like lean startup before? Okay, almost everybody. Look, I'm just same thing. Look, you know this as the build, measure, and learn cycle. And we call this a validated learning loop. And the goal of this isn't to build faster. The goal of this is to learn faster. And the way we learn faster is by doing less, by narrowly focusing on specific things to learn, and by doing less. And look, if our biggest concern is that people really want our product or really even have the problem we're solving, we can do that by just interviewing customers. If the biggest concern is whether people can use what we're building, we could do an interview, and we could build a simple paper, a prototype. We could do a higher fidelity prototype with some things, we eventually need to actually build something that's a working prototype. We call this a live data prototype. Consumer companies use things like A/B tests, well, sort of live data, things like that. There's a lot of other ways we use to simulate things. At some point in time, we actually may build working software, but only kind of working for a small number of people. We may deliver something to, like I built software for brick and mortar retailers for years. We always built something to release into one store, iterated it, and then we would scale it out. We usually work with chains of stores, no smaller than 100 stores and usually up into the 2,000 and 3,000. But I did not build something that would scale to 3,000 stores out of the chute. That would be nuts. It would take a long time. So I can build something I can ship to a small subset of early adopters, people that will try this thing. Now, here's the question to ask. If I go back to that bet thing, is if you are building software right now, and we format as a hypothesis statement and say, look, what would you bet? If you're in the process of building potentially shippable software, but the most I can get you up to is lunch, I'll put you right here in this chart. This is the stupid zone. This is stupid and expensive. Some companies actually do invest in a lot of, they do design sprints for everything, whether it's obvious or not. They do lots of interviews, lots of prototypes, and when people are hemorrhaging, the solution is obvious. Sometimes they're still up here, but look, I bet you my car is going to work out. This is also stupid. It's just wasting time. You can see when I draw this thing, there's a safe zone right up the middle. Where, well, what we're doing in here, this is safe. This is where we scale our learning investment with our confidence. That's the way we actually do this. And to race directly to potentially shippable software, if you are not confident enough to bet at least the value of that software, is just stupid and expensive. So don't. Look, I started with the don't assume you're right here. Communicate your bets. Actually discuss the risk, not the risk that you can deliver it on time, because that's a risk too. But use small bets, experiments, tests, learning activities to remove uncertainty from your bets. Hey, for people familiar with Agile development, anybody heard the term spike before? How do you estimate a spike? Why not? Why wouldn't you? You don't know what you're going to get. How much software you get out of a spike? None. Why don't you? What do you do to know how long a spike is going to take? Time box it. Look, Agile development has always understood this validated learning process that I described. It's just that Agile development sprung from a client-vendor anti-pattern where the only thing we're responsible for is time, cost, and scope, or feasibility risks. When we start to expose value risks and usability risks, it makes sense to do time box tests against these things too. It's when we work with this client-vendor anti-pattern that we can consider outcome and impact somebody else's problem. When it's our problem, you can bet we're going to figure out a way to test. And the evidence that Agile hasn't had to worry about in the past is the fact that we had to wait for lean startup and lean UX to add it back in. So I sound a little snarky. I'm sorry. Now look, let's see if I can bring a couple of these things home. The next one is all slides. Look, I can go fast with this. Look, stop spending so much time in the office. Somebody said, I asked somebody what my role was in XP, and that somebody actually repeated back, did somebody here say the customer on-site thing? Look, in XP I was called a customer, and there was a principle of XP that was customer on-site. That meant we want somebody there with the team the whole time. Now look, yeah, that was the customer on site. Now look, imagine you are Jane Goodall if you know who Jane Goodall is, she studies primates, and she spends a lot of time in the field talking about, she spends a lot of time in jungles waiting for chimpanzees to do something interesting that takes a long time, it's wet, it's awful, and look, if you imagine where to say, look, Jane, we have this Agile process called Chimpanzee on Site, and it will save you a huge amount of time in your primate study. All you have to do is bring the chimpanzee to you, and if you have a primate question, just turn and ask the chimp. That's that easy, but just really, that doesn't work. When I started in the 1990s, I built software for brick and mortar retailers, and I have lots of boring photos of hanging around in carpet and home decorating stores watching as people work to understand how they built things. An early client of ours that we did work for was a company called Kinko's that got bought by FedEx and is now FedEx Office, and I have old pictures. You can tell they're old because look, that's what monitors used to look like. My kids don't even know what that is. We sat with them and watched them work and do this. This used to be my boss back then. He's now the CIO of a local university, and he gave me this weird backhanded comment introducing me to his executives. He said, look, this is Jeff, and years ago I worked with him. He said, look, you did all this taking your team out and actually talking to customers thing, and he said, look, if we'd known what you're doing, it would have stopped you. But after you started doing it, it seemed to make such a big difference, we just decided not to say anything. And that's what I did. I didn't know any better. I didn't know what to build. I just knew I was accountable for the success of my product, and I could not ask any one of my customers what the right thing to build was, because I learned very quickly that they did not care about each other, and they definitely did not care about my company's ROI. They just did not have my best interest or each other's best interest at heart, but at the end of the day, I knew we had to help them. But don't wait for permission. Go to where they are, talk with them, work with them. I'll stop the stories here. Sit with them while they work. Let them explain to you where the tough parts are or how things are and work. Show them ideas where they are. Look, the guy on the right is a product manager for a line of portable printers. The guy on the left is from China. He designs portable printers. The guy in the middle will take a picture of you and your family in front of the Gateway Monument in Mumbai for 30 rupees. These guys spend time watching these people work. That printer does not look very portable to me, by the way. These guys make friends. There's some amount of empathy that we build while doing this. And that's, I gotta tell you, if you actually go out and sit with customers and spend time, it may lower your velocity. But look, I gotta tell you that teams that care and are motivated about what they're building outperform teams with good acceptance criteria 5 to 1. Look, everyone needs to spend face time with users and keep users in mind. We want to end at 8:30, and I want to leave room for questions. We've talked about, my 5th point here is to stop hiding work from the team. If you are a product, and these are the 5 ways product ownership gets fixed. If your organization understands that we have learning work, and learning work fits this this pattern I drew for you here, where we start with hypotheses and figure out what we need to learn, and we test. It's all spikes. It's all experiments. This is the work we call discovery. And the way we do discovery is we start with ideas, and we pull one out, and we go through one of those build, measure, learn cycles where we get information. And sometimes first ones are sometimes long, we have to get our bearings, and then sometimes they're short, but we measure these things in hours or days, not sprint length, not weeks. Sometimes the result of those is to trash or kill our ideas. But if we kill an idea, we know there's always another one. And we pull it back out, and we go through these cycles and do this. And when we finally have something we are confident to build, then we invest in software we can actually ship. Then we build a different kind of backlog, and we move to a sort of a different way of working that focuses on development. that focuses on those things that Scrum and Agile patterns, as we follow them, are best at. They're great at predictability, at quality, and that's awesome. And we go from working in things that take hours and days to things that take weeks. We go into these shorter Scrum things. But the problem, if you've got a product, there's always lots of ideas, and we kind of pass these forward. These people don't wait for these people to finish this. We build things in small chunks. We work at a feature at a time. And look, while we were doing this work, well, the team was building the last feature. And once we finish this work, we've got to pick up the next thing and start building that, or start doing discovery work on that. We have two types of work, and when this model gets drawn, it often gets referred to as dual track development. And the mistake that people make is to think that it is it's called dual track because there are two kinds of work in the same team. It is two tracks, it is not two teams. Now, when we're doing this type of work, we do have to get out there and look, we do have to get out there and spend time with customers, and it isn't just UX people or people with experience doing interviews that do this. This is this guy Sharif I showed you before from Atlassian, and a rule of thumb there at Atlassian is that we don't do customer interviews without having a developer in the room. So that's the way it works here. These people are doing an interview, and oddly, the one actually doing the interview there, look, normally we bring other team members along to take notes and pay attention, but the guy actually in the middle of talking to a customer on the left is a QA person. Turned out after doing this for a while, he really got good at it and really liked doing it. But at minimum, I gotta tell you also, the reason this picture here is so blurry is because I'm sitting across the room in Starbucks with the lead engineer who is deathly afraid to sit with customers. It doesn't relieve him the responsibility of going and at least listening in and trying to take notes, and the goal is to build some empathy. And when we come back, we socialize what we've learned, we build shared understanding about it using simple things like simple proto-personas or simple journey maps, and these quick ad hoc personas are things that the people at Atlassian build. You recognize that guy's face by now. How many people were here at the design sprint thing that was here? I heard somebody, that was the last.
Yeah, that was the last one.
Yeah, how many were here for that? Okay, look, when you do that kind of work, that's quick and collaborative, and it means everybody pitches in to figure out how this product looks and works. It means not just UI designers design, everybody designs, everybody gets time to sketch, and comes back together and shares their ideas. It is up to a designer to integrate ideas and make tough decisions about what really are good ideas and what really aren't, but everybody contributes. That's how the design works. And when it comes time to build prototypes, people help with that, especially when it comes to start building live data prototypes, things like that. Look, discovery work is teamwork. The organizations that I have that do this start every sprint planning meeting by talking about what discovery work we have to do and how much of that we want to time box this sprint and how whole teams will participate. At sprint reviews, we talk about what we learned in discovery work. Every day at daily stand-ups, we talk about the work, the discovery work we're doing and the development work we're doing. Let's end up here. Look, these are 5 big things, and for a lot of organizations, these are 5 horribly impossible things. Product teams are cross-functional teams. They're not a product owner that works with a bunch of developers, and those aren't separate groups. They work together. They are accountable for that outcome and impact. They know that their job is to build less, so they build less by making small bets, doing learning activities to do that. They actually get out and spend time with customers themselves. They build empathy, and they plan on doing all this stuff together. And when we start to change Scrum so it works, it looks different than Scrum today. that was, that's where this thing ends. Now, it took me a little over an hour to get there. I knew this was long and I rambled a lot. Do I have a big finish? No, I don't have a big finish. I meant to try and contextualize this a little bit more for nonprofit, and the 15 minutes or so we have left, we got to talk a little bit about how that happens. But all right, for the people that have to get out of here, you should. But thanks for listening to this thing. What questions does any of this leave you with? Actually, we're teaching a class today, and Arif is in the class that we've got. And I could ask you, look, I just described a whole bunch of things that are true about product, about how how product ownership or product management really works in a product company in a lot of the ways. It's funny, we're getting better at this. We refined our language an awful lot. But in a weird way, I'm trying to get people back to what I was doing in 1998. And it is what companies like Atlassian and Spotify and other companies are doing right now today. But let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 5, how does what you do every day match any of the stuff I just talked about? Where 5 is, that's the way we do things. I learned nothing here today. 3 is, well, we do some of those things, but a lot of those things we don't do. And 1 is, you're talking smack. That's science fiction. There's no way we could do any of those things in the world where I work in. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much of these kinds of things you're doing? 1, 2, 3? Yeah, I'm curious where the read is. Okay. I see 2s all the way up to 4s. Do we know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is? That means, usually it means anybody that answers with 5 is lying. So go look up the Dunning-Kruger effect later. So yeah, if you think you're awesome, you're usually not. But there are some people that probably are awesome that answered 4. And in a room full of people for the class we're teaching, what's interesting for me is the diversity. We have some people who answer 1 to that question, and some people that answer high numbers to that question. And there is a real disparity between the have and have-nots, between the Spotifys and Atlassians and the government fixed price, fixed scope contract thing, or some of the banking things that I've seen. Any questions? What questions do you have about this stuff? Yeah, please.
So we spend, I think, where we work, the technology team is trying to do a lot of this stuff, but we also have to spend a lot of time persuading other people to let us work in this way. So, especially in terms of starting with the user need, sometimes people find that threatening, and making time for learning and therefore not consistently delivering. Do you have what 1, 2 things what can we tell people to make that easier?
Hypotheses. Look, we're building this. There are lots of variations of hypothesis statements. We're building this, and we bet this is the outcome we get. Start measuring, even subjectively. One thing I'll ask people to do is, one thing I've done in rooms, even full of stakeholders, is to have them name the last 5 features or 5 things or several things that we've delivered. And I will ask them to rate them on a scale of awesome, we really got the value out of this, to awful, not only did we not get the value out of this, it actually hurt us to ship it. And they will very quickly see that, gosh, a lot of what we ship is low. I can almost guarantee that if you rate things from awesome to awful, they'll see it. And so that's a way to expose outcome and impact right away. And then include them. In design thinking terms, that's sometimes we call that co-creation. And it's one thing to have them try and think about. I remember people familiar with Marriott as a hotel chain. Marriott's all over the world, but it's not as big a chain here. know, a friend of mine that used to work with Marriott, and they were responsible. Marriott's are franchisees, and they built software for franchisees. He had an executive that was working there that wasn't giving a lot of time and air for this stuff. He invited the executive to lunch, and then he kidnapped the executive, took them to a Marriott franchise, and let him back in the room and had him talk to the manager of the Marriott franchise, and had him listen to this guy complain for a while and do things. And if you can let them do not waste time describing data to them. Do not waste time showing them stupid stuff like personas. Personas are to actual empathy as vacation photos are to actual vacation. Actually take them on vacation. Don't show them cool pictures of exotic places or exotic customers. Actually, if they could meet somebody or be in an interview, that's good. And sometimes you have to orchestrate it. I gave a few don'ts in there, but one of the other, maybe the big first don't is just don't talk about process. Everything that we were just talking about, that's for us. I find that most business executives, honest to God, do care about outcome and impact. And if we talk about these things, that matters to them and how we are and aren't getting them. And sometimes when executives don't trust Agile team members, it's because they start talking about story points and velocity, and that's where the starting comment is. You ask what are the one or two things. Did I just give you several impossible things to do? No. I'm sorry. Yeah, I hate giving impossible things, but yeah, it's a culture change, which you know. Anybody else? Filling all questions.
This is one. You said that if you're trying to implement something new, if you give the customer what they want, they oftentimes don't use them. If you're doing it in a prototype fashion, isn't that sort of tainting your result pool because you're giving them a prototype to use and you're saying, this is the feature.
Yeah.
And then I implemented something like this years ago, and we found out all the tests were good, and then 2 years later no one uses it. But we did what you suggest. We took a small expert pool, we took a reference pool of customers, we taught them how to use it, we gave it to them. And
Did you leave it with them and let them use it in their jobs?
we did, to the extent of our time, we did 3 months, which is not small enough.
Yeah.
But for legal reasons, they couldn't use it for their actual financial calculations. But
It's when they start actually using for their actual financial calculations. I remember when I said see, try, that use part means that. So you didn't do that.
not in the prototype, because in England there's hoops you have to get accredited, and therefore you have to start betting on business.
The trick is, so I can see why it failed. Again, they might have liked it and predicted that they would use it, just like just like a lot of us may predict we will use that exercise machine we bought in January, and it gathers dust later on, and
It's great for drying clothes.
That's great. It is. They serve two purposes. But the problem is we have a hard time predicting our own behavior. Now, the trick is to figure out actually how we can test it. I've worked with companies that do electronic medical records and our HIPAA regulations in the U.S., things like that. We were building software for a newborn intensive care unit in a hospital. You can bet there's a little bit of concern about whether the software works or not, things like that. But the doctors, we look for people who are early adopters. Early adopters like being involved in this process and have a problem and are motivated to solve it. And they agreed to double chart, meaning they use their existing medical records product. At the end of every day, they spent an extra hour charting patients in our system, which didn't have all the certifications and things like that, so that we could compare the results, so that they could actually use it every day, and we could iterate it until they said, this feels a lot better than what we have here. And you've got to be creative. When we are looking for things that don't, if we're looking for things that don't fall into the stupid zone, but also help us build our confidence. Sometimes it's hard, it's a trick to find things somewhere here in the middle that actually allows us to learn. We do actually end up having to build some software, but it actually allows us to see whether people use it. With consumer software, it is so much easier. But with banking software, things like that, it's tougher. But at the end of the day, even if you just expose your risks, even if you're able to say, we have given people prototypes, they said they like it, but people are notoriously bad at predicting what they will actually use. And company, we have some huge risk here. Just be aware of it. Everybody takes on risk, just expose it. So don't be surprised. But maybe a longer conversation is trying to figure out how we can actually get somebody to, honest to God, pilot it. And sometimes you have to pilot it alongside of other systems, or sometimes you have to get. I was hearing about the government in Finland. Has anybody heard this? Whether is it Finland that's experimenting with a guaranteed income?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it Denmark? I thought I heard Finland too, and maybe more people, where they took a group of people that were earning unemployment, and they instead gave these people a lower guaranteed income. But if you're earning unemployment, you had to prove you were looking for a job, and you could not actually accept a job. It didn't make sense for you to accept a job that paid you less than unemployment, so you turned down jobs that were lower. They gave you a guaranteed income that did this. But look, they want to do this guaranteed income thing, but they had to get special permission to, because the government is obligated to provide everybody the same service. Had actually changed the rules about the way that we're to do it. Maybe the financial industry needs to change some rules about how if there is, it seems super unsafe to have a regulatory system that has no way of testing what we're doing. How odd that the regulations that are proposed to keep us safe ensure the failure we're talking about. Yeah. Anyway. Enough said, but you're right, not so easy.
One more question.
Yeah, we got
Can I just mention one? When you talked about outcomes and you mentioned and measuring those and that focus, and you mentioned it was a nonprofit person, that could be because a lot of what they need to do is apply for grants and things. And those are focused on specifying outcomes.
Yeah.
Not about all those
How
other
odd
metrics.
that when we try and put together a project plan, we don't have to specify.
So they do start with that. So there's a difficult one in a nonprofit and social enterprise world. You measure things by social impact.
Yes.
It's not just about revenue growth and things like that. So it can be difficult to measure. It's still about outcomes, but if you're starting small, your sample sizes are small, and that can be dangerous in extrapolating to, is this going to give us the social impact we need?
Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of accurately project, or do you just scale slowly to get to it?
Two things I'll mention. It's funny, you're right. The word for impact is, when we start talking about social impact, we can do something to try and bring about social impact, but everybody who does this is mindful that they may do something, put an event or put something out there that helps, and they can measure actually whether people attended an event or consumed some information, and maybe change behavior in the short term. But these impactful things aren't return on investment, they're big impact. And we know that no one single thing we do will have an impact. It's a lot of things that we do over time. And we also learn, if we're trying to do social impact, that no single thing by itself does it. And we also know that if we actually do start to have an impact, attribution post hoc is incredibly difficult. It's hard to know which thing did it. If you are a large software company like SAP and you sell software, and the licensing fee is this much, if I make a change that makes one part easier to use and more people use it, did that mean I made more money as SAP? The figuring out attribution at an organizational level is equally time-consuming, and attribution is equally impossible. We can't predict any of this stuff. So anyway, by the way, one of the, you can see I have a lot of pet peeves. And in some early Agile development text, they talked about prioritizing backlogs based upon return on investment, which right away tells me this person's actually never managed a product, because return on investment is almost it's an impactful thing. You cannot look at the return on investment of a feature. Now, I can't tell you how many people used it, and I can make some inferences on whether it does or doesn't contribute to things like that. Now, yes, we usually start with small samples, and we usually release to small numbers of people to do this. And the only math that allows you to project is pure voodoo. Anyone that says they have accurate math that does that, these are also people that have accurate math that projects stock market increases and decreases and things like that. It's just not easy. If this were easy, we'd outsource it all, and it does require experience and intuition. It's more craft than science, and I think I might be saying that because I suck at numbers and metrics, and there may be people that are better at this. But but the people that are really good at this do lean an awful lot on their intuition to do it. And I find an awful lot of people that have a lot of flashy math that don't have any positive outcome or impact to show for. How's that for a terrible answer? I don't know. There's no good commonly accepted models or ways to do this stuff, but that doesn't mean